Awesome. Thank you. Well, again, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this week's Beyond Access Series webinar. My name is Ori. I am the Family Empowerment Communications Coordinator for the New York City Department of Education, and I will be your host tonight. Tonight, I'm very excited to announce that we are kicking off a three-part series from the Just Say Hi, which is the award-winning disability inclusion PK through 12 school-based program run by the Cerebral Palsy Foundation. And we are also very excited to also have our very own Greenie Dixon here to be joining us for these three sessions as our American Sign Language interpreter. So thank you for joining us as well. Now, tonight's session is titled The Balancing Act, Meeting Students Where They Are At While Motivating Them Where They Can Go. And it will be led by two amazing speakers, and we'll go over supportive programs and resources. We'll outline 10 key tips for parents and guardians to support students with disabilities at home. But before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes. As a general reminder, there is no chat function enabled during the session, but the Q&A function will be on for you to ask questions throughout the presentation, and we will be here behind the scenes to try to answer as many questions as we can throughout the session. But don't worry, we do set a time at the end of the session to answer any questions that we can as well at that time. As always, this session will be recorded and posted onto our YouTube page the following day. So don't worry if you miss any content or miss anything from the presentation, because you'll be able to watch it onto our YouTube page. If you don't follow our YouTube page, well, I don't know what you're doing, but there's some great content on there. So go follow Beyond Access Series on YouTube. And like I said, more content will be posted. And as a reminder, we will send out a recap email of tonight's session with the link to the recording, as well as any additional materials that we discuss here tonight. Now, as I mentioned earlier, tonight's session will be led by two amazing different speakers. This will first be led by Debbie Fink, the Vice President of Education and Inclusion at the Cerebral Palsy Foundation, and then followed by Jennifer Lyman, the Resource Content Manager for the Cerebral Palsy Foundation. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Debbie.
Thank you, Ori. As always, it's such a pleasure to be here in partnership with NYC DOE and your Beyond Access platform, which is so phenomenal. As Ori said, I'm Debbie Fink, Vice President of Education and Inclusion for CPF. And as such, I get to run the program that you can see behind me called Just Say Hi, which, as Ori mentioned, is a fabulous award-winning disability inclusion pre-K through 12 school-based program. If you don't know about it, you should. It was developed and is in the works in partnership with NYC DOE. So we are really appreciative of that. In the name of modeling best practices, this is the first best practice. I'm a white woman. I have shoulder-length brown hair. I'm wearing glasses, and I'm seated in front of the Just Say Hi banner. Second best practice that Beyond Access always utilizes is the closed captioning, which serves not only people who are hard of hearing, but people who are deaf and English as second language learners and folks like me who just process information better when we can read it. The audio description that I did earlier, individuals who are low vision or blind. And very important, as Ori pointed out, we have our one and only Greenie Dixon as our American Sign Language interpreter. And as a veteran, Greenie, I always like to say thank you for your service. Yes, Greenie is the veteran, not me. So, okay, with no further ado, let's get started with today's topic, which is the Balancing Act, meeting students with disabilities where they're at while motivating them to where they can go. I like to start with this quote: "Everyone, regardless of ability or disability, has strengths and weaknesses. Know what your child's strengths are and build on these strengths and find a way around their weaknesses." That's a quote from Brad Cohen, who we'll hear more from later, who was Georgia State's first year Teacher of the Year and is author of Front of the Class: How Tourette Syndrome Made Me the Teacher I Never Had. The mantra for our three-part series, okay, which is this week, next week, and then 2 weeks following, is presume competence, meaning assume that your child is capable of doing X, Y, and Z until proven otherwise, and then revisit that even at another point in time. And expect that all adults who interact with your child are also presuming competence. That is just the mantra that you'll be hearing over and over from us. It's so important as parents of children with disabilities and as children with disabilities that we are immersed with role models who are breaking down stereotypes. There are so many disabled role models who are breaking down stereotypes everywhere. And I'm flipping between person first and identity first language to honor the different approaches within the disability community. Today, we'll introduce a few of those role models who had adults in their lives, a parent or a teacher or a therapist or someone else who presumed their competence. So important. We're going to cover 10 tips for parental guardian support of students with disabilities. And our presentation is an adaptation, CPF's adaptation of an earlier document that was developed by Dr. Victor Santiago Pineda and his team. And actually the original document was in Spanish, I believe. So this is our adaptation. And we are so pleased, I'm so pleased to be able to introduce our keynote speaker, Jennifer Lyman, who is a cherished colleague and friend and is the resource content manager at CPF. And CPF is short for the Cerebral Palsy Foundation, just so you should know. And Jen does twice a week, she does Instagram messaging with CPF. I do once a week, focused on education. So with that said, I turn it over to Jen.
Thank you, Debbie, and you are a cherished colleague as well, and I appreciate being invited to be part of this presentation today. And I'm going to give you a little bit about, or first of all, in honor of best practices, I am a white woman seated in front of glass windows. I happen to live in New Orleans, Louisiana, so it's still light outside here. I'm an hour behind you all, and I have wild curly brown hair, and so that's what I look like for those with low vision. And my son happens to have low vision, and he always appreciates having it described to him. So I'm going to go over these 10 tips, and I'd like to begin. It's my interpretation, Cerebral Palsy Foundation's interpretation of the 10 tips, and then Jen Lyman's further interpretation of these tips based on my background and my experience as a parent. So I'll give you a little bit about my background. Back in 1995, I was teaching dance to children when I got a call from Nemours Children's Hospital asking if I would be willing to include a group of girls from their physical therapy program who had cerebral palsy. They wanted to dance. And that year, of course, I said yes. And that year, we hosted the Nemours Nutcracker with all of my children that have been in my dance program and all of the little girls from Nemours Children's Hospital dancing together, shining up there on the stage together. And I realized at that moment, at that time, that what I really wanted to do was to help create opportunities for individuals with disabilities to participate in activities alongside their so-called normal peers, not separate or apart from them. And that the time for separate but equal in disability was over. And I honestly at the time didn't know how tough that could be. So I went back to graduate school and I got a master's degree in health and human performance, and I became a recreation therapist. And I started my career in a group home, and then and it was specifically for adults with cerebral palsy. And then I went into inpatient psychiatric, large psychiatric hospital. And then I went on to become a case manager for children and adolescents with multiple disabilities in therapeutic foster care. And my job was helping them and their families access and receive community, educational, legal, and healthcare supports that they needed. Then in 2005, my son Bauer was born. And he had a rough start. It was pretty rough. But now he's 17 and he's super awesome. He also uses a wheelchair to get around. He uses technology and speech to communicate. And depending on the environment, he has difficulty seeing. He has a diagnosis of CP, and you'll hear in a couple minutes a lot of the other things people have said about him. So I want to move on. That's where my background is, and that's where I'm coming from in talking about disability and how we perceive it, and where these tips, where my interpretation of these tips. So the first tip we have is recognize children with disabilities are capable and can change the world. And I have to say, labels matter. I learned this early on in the group home. Reducing individuals to labels like severe and profound, which is what the name of the group home was, directly impacts quality of life. It changes the way other people think about individuals with disabilities, and it changes how they are treated. Labels perpetuate stereotypes, they create limitations, and they generate preordained and unfair conclusions, and none of this is good. Labels create unfair barriers, and honestly, we still have classrooms labeled severe and profound. And you know, in many IEPs that I've attended, children have been called by their diagnosis rather than their name. I've seen parents and you know, talking, and teachers talking about kids in front of them as if they're not there, and that doesn't presume competence. The kids are listening, and so are their peers. And I also want to I want you all to even think about the way children are talked about when they aren't around, that could potentially prevent successful integration into the community. You know, what we say impacts how we think. So as a family, we didn't listen to the people who told us that our son Bauer, at the ripe old age of 3, was already severe and profound. We didn't listen to the nurse who said he had a mushy brain. She literally told us he had a mushy brain. We never believed that the only thing we could do for our son was hope and pray that he would not become a vegetable. You know, instead, we listened to those who rejected labels and who insisted and really who insisted and chose to instill optimism and cultivate our confidence and promote his participation. So I think, Debbie, you have a video. We have a video from an author, Naoki, who has shifted stereotypes and omitted labels in the world of autism. I think you have the magic key to start this video for me.
An autistic author from Japan. He is nonverbal, communicates using his laptop, and his cardboard keyboard. Naoki wrote his first book when he was 13 years old, titled The Reason I Jump, which became a world's bestseller and now a major film. While Naoki continues to write, he also gives talks with his mom, Mickey, and hopes for a society that is understanding.
You know, Naoki is quite the role model for all our kids and parents struggling with acceptance of their child with autism or any disability, really. You know, and he does serve as a great role model. Thanks for sharing that video, Debbie. So tip number 2, know your rights and fight for them. And I, from my understanding from this webinar series, is that you all have heard a lot about the key laws that protect students with disabilities. Just to briefly mention Section 504 and the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, are where your IEPs and your 504 plans are legally rooted. You all have heard a lot about these, I understand, so I'm not going to go into them. I'll mention something about the ADA Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. The Americans with Disabilities Act has a national network which provides information, guidance, and training on how to implement ADA in order to support its mission, which is to assure equality of opportunity, full participation, independent living, and economic self-sufficiency for individuals with disabilities. And the work isn't done. You know, we got ADA in 90, and I feel like we need to honor those people that strived so hard to get it passed. And we need to fight for this law and continue to fight for this law, ensuring that schools, businesses, community spaces are accessible to all. When children I see in schools are all the wheelchair kids are on the bottom floor because they don't have a working elevator. That is not the law. They should be allowed. They should be able to access all parts of the school. So, moving on to the 2000 Developmental Disabilities Assistance and Bill of Rights Act. I know this doesn't apply to everyone. My son has more complex disabilities, so I wanted to talk about this one for a little bit. The purpose of it is to assure that individuals with developmental disabilities and their families participate in the design of and have access to needed community services, individualized supports, and that other forms of assistance that promote self-determination, independence, productivity, and integration and inclusion in all facets of community life. The vision of this act is rooted in the belief that disability is a natural part of human experience that does not diminish the right of individuals with developmental disabilities to live independently or exert control and choice over their own lives, and to obviously fully participate and contribute in their communities through the mission as I've just read. The DD Act does this through 4 empowering programs.
Sorry.
They serve as advocates for individuals with developmental disabilities and their families. They investigate cases of abuse. They conduct research, test new service delivery models, and deliver the information to families, self-advocates, and policymakers and service providers. And here we have links, or we'll provide links later. We have them both in English and Spanish. So, this is not just for, the Act acknowledges that individuals with developmental disabilities are at greater risk than the general population of abuse, neglect, financial and sexual exploitation, and the violation of their legal and human rights. And the Protection Advocacy Program is there to help fight for their rights in this case. There's other things that it can do, which includes participation in community life. So it can help advocate for Medicaid funding for equipment and resources. It can help ensure that local recreation and community programs are including individuals with disabilities, and it can help ensure that schools are providing needed supports and resources. So that's an important act to know about. Another one that we didn't include on the slide, but I wanted to just briefly mention, is the Family Education and Privacy Act, otherwise known as FERPA. This act provides students and their parents the right to inspect and review education records, the right to seek to amend those records, and the right to limit the disclosure of information from the records. And it's obviously the intent of this legislation is to protect the rights of students, to ensure that their privacy and the accuracy of their records. And it applies to all institutions that are recipients of federal aid by the Secretary of Education. But there's an important point about this. Be aware that there are many instances where schools do not have to gain your consent to share student records. So it is in your best interest to ensure that what is in your students' records is accurate. This is your child's information. You should know what's in there and who has access to it. So let's move on to tip number 3, creating a network of support. What resources are at your disposal, and what does your child need to maximize their potential without barriers? And I truly believe that cultivating friends, family, faith-based groups, community recreation centers, your school team, your medical team, think about who has reached out to you and offered support. Don't be afraid to ask your school or your medical team who might be looking for extra work, or what resources in the community they've heard about from other families. So let's hear from a young woman who created a network of support that presumed her competence and helped her achieve her success as a fashion designer. So these clothes were designed by a young woman with Down syndrome. She is internationally renowned designer with a disability. She's the first. She's 20-year-old Isabella Tejada, who grew up in Guatemala. She was inspired by her grandmother, who is also a designer. Isabella knew she wanted to study fashion. She says she was rejected by 2 schools because of her disability. Nonetheless, she persevered. Her brand is called Down to Extrabella, and her designs are inspired by Guatemalan national folklore. Her work has been showcased. I can't see the rest of that.
And
I can't see all of it.
And she made BBC's list of 100 inspirational and influential women. Isabella says she's never seen Down syndrome as a setback. And she wants to be a role model for young people with the disability.
And she certainly is. But it's because her family created a network of support that she's been able to succeed. So we'll move on to tip number 4. Promote and support your child's independence. So we have a bunch of bullet points here. There's a few that I want to talk about that I've found unique to our family, but I've also seen with other students that I've worked with. And I highly recommend looking into vocational rehab at an early age, vocational rehabilitation. Often middle school, even high school doesn't get vocational rehabilitation involved. However, they can provide additional resources to your student and help assist with developing employment goals and provide technology that might be a good fit for your student. Also, the Administration for Community Living, the ACL, is an excellent resource. Its premise is that older adults and people with disabilities should have the same opportunities as everyone else to choose where they live, earn a living, and participate in society and make decisions about their lives. A theme. They have great resources for assistive technology, centers for independent living, and workforce innovation. And then we have the home and community based services, which is under Medicaid, and it serves to provide opportunities for Medicaid beneficiaries to receive services in their home rather than institutions or isolated settings. But under the Medicaid waivers program, which is under this home and community based services, states can offer a variety of unlimited services that are a combination of medical and non-medical services. So I'm talking about this in this webinar because there are non-medical services that are available that can actually, they can help you at home, they can help you in the school, but some of these are case management, which includes support coordination, home health aides, personal care attendants, adult day health services, habilitation, and respite care. And states can also do other types of services that might assist in diverting or transitioning individuals from institutional settings into their homes and in communities. And for those who have students or children with more complex needs, I think it's very important to understand that having personal care attendants and one-to-ones doesn't mean that person has to do everything for your student. That person's job is to support their independence, which is what we want them to do and where they want them to go. They really are. That is part of the child's ability to be independent, is that they have this one-to-one help. So it's kind of a different framework of thinking about it. So let's move on to tip number 5. Meet with teachers to create a success plan for your child. So my first point here is to work with the teachers to create an IEP that removes labels and addresses needs. So statements such as severe or profound or significant really don't tell you what your child needs. They just create misconceptions. Figure out what your child actually needs to succeed and address that without making statements that can inadvertently hinder success. Second, goals should be across all classes so that your child is working on things throughout the day. It could be the same goal, but different opportunities to practice that goal, and it can be done in different classes and in different ways. Also, teachers' assistants, custodians, cafeteria staff, the principal, they should be aware of key points of your child's IEP or before plan, so that if they run into your child in the hallway, they can provide the just right challenge in the moment. These are key moments throughout the day when learning happens. And then if your child has a one-to-one or a TA, a teacher assistant, that person should always be included in the IEP. And I can't tell you how many times I've sat in IEPs where the person who I consider has the heaviest responsibility, that one-to-one, is not in the IEP. And I feel like they're honestly the least prepared for this heavy role that they have because they haven't been included in the IEP and in the planning. So work with the school to invest through professional education, through training, and through including the TAs and through including the one-to-ones in all the meetings so that goals can be implemented as intended for the child. So they really understand the background and what the goal is meant to be. It really helps. These meetings are important. And then finally on this topic, I want you to understand that the role of school-based therapists is to ensure successful inclusion and access to the curriculum. So whether that be through seating and positioning, modified equipment or assistive technology, whatever physical or cognitive supports the student may need to help them learn. This is different than clinic-based or outpatient therapy where your child might be working on specific functional skills in a one-to-one type of setting. The school-based therapists are really there to conduct therapy with the peers so that your child can be working on these things in a fun setting where they're really practicing with those who they're going to be growing up with. And so, if there's something specific that your child needs, that's a great opportunity for outpatient therapy. So we have a great video from Brad Cohen, who Debbie mentioned earlier, the Georgia Teacher of the Year, who talks about having a disability and achieving his dream of becoming a teacher.
Oops. There's always that one teacher who has made a lasting impression on you, encouraging you to follow your dreams.
Yeah, well, this morning we're introducing you to an educator who was told he would be more of a distraction than a motivator in the classroom, but he proved everyone wrong.
So let's see. 1 is easy, 2 is okay, 3 is difficult.
When Brad Cohen enters a classroom at his Addison Elementary School in Marietta, this assistant principal, who knew from a young age he wanted to be a teacher, gets right to work with his students.
So now, prediction of flight in feet. How far do you think you're going to throw it in feet?
And the children don't appear to be fazed that he has a neurological disorder called Tourette's syndrome.
And let's do it for real and we'll find the actual distance.
The disorder causes him to have tics that he cannot control.
These could be sounds, these could be movements, and really throughout the whole day, my brain is telling my body to do different things that I don't necessarily want to do.
He started showing signs that he had special needs the summer before 4th grade. And after numerous doctor visits, he finally got the diagnosis that he says turned out to be a blessing in disguise.
In a weird way, it was a good feeling because finally I had a name. Finally had a name for why I was doing all these weird things.
But growing up and following his dream of becoming an educator wasn't a smooth journey for Cohen.
They said, how can you possibly be an effective teacher with Tourette's syndrome? Well, I've never seen somebody, with Tourette's be effective in the classroom.
But his mother always taught him to never allow anyone to steal your dreams, no matter how great the obstacle.
She was a big role model for me. She was out there saying, Brad, we could do it. Don't give up. We're not going to let them stop us.
Nothing and no one stopped him. So he realized he needed to be a voice for the voiceless. 10 years ago, he wrote a book, Front of the Class, How Tourette's Syndrome Made Me the Teacher I never had. But it didn't end there.
I just knew I needed to share my story with others. And then after sharing my story, I was on that Oprah Winfrey had me on her show, and I was able to educate millions of people about this condition.
Cohen's life then came to life on the small screen, with Hallmark Hall of Fame creating a TV movie about his journey.
This is definitely my purpose in life. It's just to go out there and make a difference one day at a time, and to be that role model for so many people, to show them that you can follow your dreams. For me, Tourette's syndrome is my challenge, but why shouldn't I be able to go to baseball games? Why shouldn't I be able to go out there and be a teacher and make a difference in the lives of kids, just like other people?
Empowering our youth to soar to incredible heights, regardless of the mountain in front of them.
Oh!
Thank goodness he had a mother who presumed his competence and never allowed anyone to dash his dreams. What a neat guy. So tip number 6, be involved in your child's learning, and obviously insist that educators and all others presume competence. I really think communication is key here, and it goes both ways from us to the teachers. We really keep those open lines of communication. It couldn't be easier these days. We texting, emailing, calling, whatever it takes to ensure that you and the team are effectively communicating. You're never a bother. And if you feel like a bother, there's a problem. Document the communications, keep a log. If you are having difficulty with communicating, the only way to demonstrate this is by documenting it. And these days it is so easy, like I said, because we have text, cell phones, emails. One of my coworkers literally numbers her emails as she keeps her log, which is much more organized than I would ever be. Be a part of school programs. If there's a parent council or a PTA, a parent council that's particularly involved in students with disabilities, and then a more general PTA, it's important to get involved to the extent that you can, so that you ensure that students with disabilities are being considered in all curriculum planning, even after school events, after school programs, including sports. It's very important for the other families to know that the individuals with disabilities should be included in all of the school events. And that said, Cerebral Palsy Foundation does have a disability education curriculum called Just Say Hi. I think Debbie's going to talk about it a little bit more. It helps educate all students about disability and inclusion. If your school doesn't have this as part of their curriculum, please reach out to us, reach out to Debbie. She can tell you a whole lot more. That's my plug for Just Say Hi. It's a great program.
Thanks, Jen.
You're welcome. And then
in partnership with NYC DOE.
Exactly. And it is a great disability education program that everybody can learn from. So in this video, Temple Grandin gives us some personal insight into growing up with autism and the supports that she and her parents cultivated to help her succeed.
You never get cured of autism. What you do is you learn better, you learn more and more things.
Well, I didn't speak until I was 4. Now I have a BA and a master's, and I'm studying for my doctorate.
I can remember the frustration of not being able to talk. I couldn't get my words out. My speech came in gradually, a few words at a time. When I was a little kid, I was very autistic, nonverbal, rocking. That's the kind of kid they just put away in the institution. But I had a speech teacher that worked really hard with me, and I can't emphasize enough the importance of young children getting early intervention. You got a 2-year-old or 3-year-old with no speech, don't wait. High school was absolutely worst part of my life. Teasing. I got kicked out of school for throwing a book at a girl, teased me because teasing really made my life miserable. And the only places I could get away from teasing was the specialized activities. Things like horseback riding, electronics lab, model rocket club. The line was drawn in the sand. I was not allowed to become a recluse in my room. I had to get out and do things. I'm always kind of baffled at just how illogical people are in their thinking. I'm very logical in my thinking. But when I was younger, I didn't know that other people thought more in words. You see, I think in pictures. If I don't have a picture, I don't think. And my mind is very, very associative. Being a visual thinker, I tend to put things into categories. You see, autism is a very big spectrum. At one end of the spectrum, you got half the people at Silicon Valley. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got somebody who's very handicapped, remains nonverbal, is going to have to live in a supervised living situation. Really, really big spectrum. And, Einstein probably be labeled autistic today in a lot of school systems because he had no speech until age 3. I'm interested in seeing something that makes real change. I've done a lot of work that's made a lot of improvements in the livestock industry, and I think I've helped a lot of kids succeed. I want to see the kids that are like me succeed. That's the kind of stuff that makes me happy, when I see the things that I do make a difference. You never get cured of autism.
Oops.
Well, some of the language that Temple uses has evolved, but the point is that with great teachers and supportive parents, Temple has achieved her success, and thank God she's passing it forward. So tip number 7, identify experts that can help your child. I am a firm believer in utilizing your pediatrician or your developmental pediatrician for resources. And if you don't like your pediatrician, find a new one. That's simple. Talk to your friends who have children with disabilities to see who their pediatrician is if you're having difficulty finding one that you like. A good one can be the best resource. And find one that really listens to you and your needs. Don't be afraid to interview them. Find that right fit. Also, look at professional organizations that specialize in your child's disability to find professionals in your area. Often calling them or emailing them directly, they really will respond. They care. And then look at the centers that might be in your area that specialize in your child's disability. Google them, and like Google Center for Autism or Center for Cerebral Palsy, and they usually, if there's one in your area, it will come up. So tip number 8, seek out and be involved in your child's extracurricular activities. This is by far my favorite one. As a recreation therapist, I can't help it. Everything about recreation therapy is community integration and community reintegration, whether it's from inpatient rehab into the community or psychiatric hospitals to the community. This is what I love. And one thing that I feel strongly about is that we don't necessarily need specialized programs, or segregated programs is probably the better word, for children and adults with disabilities. With education and modifications, everybody can participate. These days, pediatricians who are up to date on the current research are well aware that inclusion is best, and that recreation, leisure, and fitness programs can and should be inclusive as well. Often it just takes a little bit of reassurance and a note from your doctor that says it's okay for your child to participate, and with some modifications to help. Physical therapists, occupational therapists, recreation therapists, we're all experts in this, and we can write up the modifications to help community programs include your child. So I have a little bit of a soapbox here, and just bear with me for a second. Just because your child is disabled does not mean they should not get exercise and stay fit and adhere to the same CDC guidelines that all typically developing children are expected to adhere from. And in fact, the CDC says just that. Further, just because a child is disabled doesn't mean that they should eat junk food all day. Obesity is a major problem amongst the disabled population, and it makes caregiving, behavior, and perceptions more complex, and it can impact life expectancy and quality of life. And often I feel like people feel sorry for children with disabilities, and they give them candy and junk food as rewards, or use candy and junk food as rewards for good behavior. And I think that this can create problems. We need to teach healthy eating habits and find other ways to motivate children and positively reinforce behaviors. That's my soapbox. Thanks for bearing with me. So I've got a little bit of a video here, and this is our family down in New Orleans for Mardi Gras. My son has always participated in community programs that are not segregated. They're not specialized. We've worked with the professionals to give them the tips and the tricks, and with just some modifications, we've been able to include him in all of these activities. Further, most everything we do has been free. There's availability to do these things, like a specialized bike like he has, are available through grants. The camp that he goes to is free. The skiing program that you'll see in this video is free. This is just our local park, but when he was 3 years old, he learned to ride a tricycle. He learned to swim at a regular swimming program with the help of regular swimming teachers, not therapeutic swimming teachers. And they actually, I felt like, really taught him some tricks that I never would have expected. This is the regular community horseback riding program with the help of a surcingle. He was able to sit up, and those are just regular horseback riding instructors. Again, surfing is a great activity that's free for a lot of people, and there's great programs out there that you can find and I guess a great resource is Move United for all of this stuff. That's him at camp doing, rappelling and going, behind the boat, and that again is a a wonderful camp, and I highly recommend sending your child to overnight camp if you can. And here he is skiing in a toboggan. And then this was not free. This was his birthday. And, you know, for a child that is in a wheelchair that doesn't get up and move, doesn't necessarily independently get up and move, for him to be able to fly was just an amazing opportunity that I wanted him to have. Here he is at the, he participates in the school band, as you can see. And then this is called a frame runner. And he got into frame running, and this is an adaptive sport that now has allowed him to participate on the track team with his school and with the other students at his school. So here's just a little bit of footage of him and participating with the track team, where he actually works out with the track team members, and he loves working out. Fitness has become a great opportunity for him to meet other people, participate, and frankly, his bone density, his cardiovascular health, obviously his strength and endurance have all increased significantly because of his fitness training. And then he's got a community, and this has really promoted his independence. So I know that there are community centers in New York City that do offer adaptive fitness and training. So don't be afraid to try it out. It's a great opportunity for kids with disabilities. So moving on to tip number 9, nurture a disability positive identity. Speaking of role models, he has found a lot of role models at the gym. He's also found role models from some online people like Miles Taylor, who is a guy who is a workout. He has cerebral palsy like my son, and he likes to work out. He's made friends with the ambassadors from Cerebral Palsy Foundation. So if there are online people who you can trust, don't be afraid to get to know them. Definitely has his friends from the gym. And, for Bauer, he's always been included and not segregated. And I know that for him, that's been meaningful. His friends really don't see him as different. They accept him as he is, and they know how to help him, and they advocate for him. And it always impresses me, the little things that happen and how they advocate for him. And then as far as disability first or identity first language, our family's preference is neither. We haven't focused on disability first or person first language because we choose to call Bauer by his name. I don't feel that we need to place any kind of emphasis on his disability, and frankly, neither does he. Bauer is just Bauer. He happens to use a wheelchair just like I happen to wear glasses. I don't need to tell people that I'm Jen Lyman, a person with nearsightedness. He doesn't feel the need to tell people he's Bauer with cerebral palsy. So that's my tip number 9. I think it's just up to everybody's personal choices. And then tip number 10, recognize challenges and celebrate successes. Recognize challenges not simply as barriers, but rather as opportunities to be creative and change things. And I would say cultivate that team of support. But kind of moving back to that first bullet, not every barrier is worth the opportunity to make a change. You want to be where you and your child are accepted. And if you make a big stink and fight to get in somewhere or be part of something that clearly was not accessible or accepting of you and your child, think about whether these people are the type of people you want to learn and be around, and if that change is worth it. So pick your battles and save your energy for those that are worth the fight. And finally, presume competence, presume competence, presume competence. Thank you. So, Debbie, are you going to do the summary or?
Sure. Jen, thank you so much. Really, thank you. That was just so informative. So in terms of a summary, taking all of this knowledge and all these tips in terms of actionable ways to manage that balancing act, here's what we can do for and with our children. Number 1, you heard it today many times. You'll hear it again next week and 2 weeks after that. Presume competence and expect all who engage with your child to do so as well. Remember, presuming competence breeds confidence. Engage your child in that self-learning, self-education, and presuming competence to build up that self-confidence. 3, reinforce, support, and celebrate their strengths, their talents, their hobbies, and interests. 4, address their challenges and their disability and or seek workarounds. Number 5, and this is so important, accept that we all slip up. And I speak as a parent who has slipped up. We all make mistakes and we all lean too far one way or the other way at different times. You are on the journey together. Love, forgiveness, and positivity prevail. So, circling back to just say hi and bringing Just Say Hi to your child's school. If you haven't heard about Just Say Hi, then you have today. And again, this is a program that we take great pride in doing in partnership with NYC DOE, and NYC DOE was there from the very beginning when we first conceived of it and piloted it back in 2016. So Just Say Hi offers a curriculum for all stakeholders in the school community, for all students with and without disabilities, 2, for families of students with and without disabilities, raising that awareness. Engage your PTA, raise the awareness, okay? Get disability studies into your school. Talk to your assistant principal, your teacher, your school counselor, your PTA president, the person on the PTA who oversees the smaller subgroups and committees. Talk to your deputy superintendent if you have access to that individual. Talk to your superintendent if you have access to that individual. And 3rd, we also offer a professional development for educators and staff, because we do believe that everyone in the school community, everyone can benefit from disability studies. And that is evidence-based. The research shows that everyone benefits when that's the case. It's time to join in the conversation. Okay, so bringing it to school, we've talked about how you can do it. And now I just want to conclude our part by saying, come back next week. We have a great program happening. Spread the word to your friends and colleagues in school about the title is Adapting to Support Learning at Home and in School for Students with Disabilities. Same time, same place, same station, different keynote speaker. We will be joined by Jacqueline Wentworth, who is an occupational therapist and has a disability. So she brings her professional experience and her lived experience to the conversation next week. And on that, we turn it back to Ori. And we're here to take questions. We have our emails here for you to reach out to us if that is something that would serve you. Mine is debbie.fink@yourcpf.org. That's DEBBIE.FINK@yourcpf.org. And Jennifer's is jennifer.lyman@yourcpf.org. That's jennifer.lyman@yourcpf.org. And with that, bring on the questions. Ori, I turn the Zoom room over to you.
Thank you, Debbie, and thank you, Jennifer. That was a really, really beautiful presentation. I really found your your personal experience with your son. It's truly truly amazing, and like just your positive attitude and just the kind of lived experience and the ability to firsthand to be able to kind of bring this knowledge with it. To me, it feels like there's a little bit more credibility to kind of some of your your advice and your suggestions, which is really great. And I think for everyone, this is an important this balancing act that that at least with the presumed competence is a theme, but to really start out with the balancing act, I think for many of us, we feel that, especially since the the start of the pandemic, and just figuring out how to best balance. But I'm sure, you know, the difficulties are just layered and they're challenged. And I think an important question that I had one off the bat, and I think Debbie touched a little bit at the end, but something, you know, I think it was tip 7, which is like identifying resources and supports and finding. And I think a lot of times parents and families, whether it be, you know, like hesitancy or not know, feel the fear of the unknown, or just feeling like they don't have the right contact, or as you both said, the fear of making mistakes. I guess I wanted to ask a little bit more specifically on that tip, and you know, you can branch it onto other tips as well. But more so of just what are like those easy first actionable steps for parents of, you know, or families or anyone to take to really feel like, even if they just want information, you know, to take those baby steps to where they feel like they can actually get the proper information and then continuously move forward that way. I think a lot of the times it's taking that first step that is very fearful for a lot of families.
Yeah, you know, I'm probably going to go against what other people would say, but I would suggest not going directly to Google, and not going directly to Facebook to get a bunch of advice. You know, I still feel like if you've got a new diagnosis, and a new, you know, a new therapist, or something new that you've learned about your child, I still feel like you go directly to the expert and you ask them what their recommended resource is, because you know that that's going to be research evidence based, and it's going to be, you know, it's going to be authentic, and then from there, you know, get the basics from that, and then, you know, but I've been down that Google path before. I know we all have, and you know, in cerebral palsy, and specifically, you know, the top websites are not cerebral palsy websites. They're lawyers who are out to sue doctors. So they're looking to make money, and they're raising our insurance costs. I've got a whole bunch of things to say about that. And so, you know, if you ask your doctor who to go to, they would say, go to Cerebral Palsy Foundation, look at cpresource.org, which I'm proud of, and, you know, or go to the American Academy of Cerebral Palsy and Developmental Medicine. Those are how you would find resources, and you know, we might not necessarily come up first on your Google search. So that was my long answer to your quick question.
I would also add to that, like, for example, Jen went into more information about the DD Act. So if you have a child with a developmental disability, it would make good sense to go to, for example, NACDD.org. That's the National Association for Cognitive and Developmental Disabilities.org. They represent all the state councils and all the councils in the territories that are addressing all of those issues that Jen was talking about. So that's another good way to get started. But yeah, you want to start with the experts, and then sort of build your network accordingly. And not only to focus on building that network among parents of non-disabled parents of students, of children with similar disabilities that your child has, but also to seek out speaking with adults who have that disability, because the adults with that lived experience, they can be such an incredible resource to your children. And we'll be talking more about that next week. So come back.
Don't want to too much. All right. We want to taper the information as it comes. But something that I also found interesting, and there was a question earlier that at the beginning, but you know what, the emphasis right at meeting them where they're at, right, is the whole point, you know, as we're motivating where they go. But a big question, I think, and I think for a lot of parents, as you even spoke about, Jennifer, is you have, you know, the experience yourself. But like when there's maybe like you or your child feels like there's shortcomings, or there's a setback, or you know, there's a stereotype that that they start to fulfill in their own heads, right? They're like, where you're meeting them, we're like, how do you feel like the best handle those setbacks? Even, you know, as all those tips are really great and they're really helpful, I think a lot of the times too, it's like when we feel like we're stuck and we can't get past a certain point, is where the real frustration a lot of the time for parents come from.
Yeah, and I've definitely experienced that, and I think and so, it's a hard question to answer because I feel like sometimes I've tried different things with my son, and I found that he knows that I'm going to be his biggest advocate, and that I'm going to tell him, I'm going to be strong for you, and we're going to get through this together. And I think one of the things that always gets him and gets me too is when we both see people that just don't presume competence, and they don't see, and he really shuts down. He will behave accordingly. And if I guess a good example is, it takes him a long time to get a word out, and so somebody will come over and say, "Hey, Bauer," and they'll walk away before he has the physical capability of saying hi. And as a result, a lot of the time he just won't bother. And so I try to really encourage him, like, "Bauer, for people to understand you, you have to practice this. And, we need, and sometimes if I know the person well enough, I'll be like, can you just wait and just give him a second?" And try to use those as teachable moments for him, and try to help him feel confident. And but it's interesting, because I do feel like I say this to our school a lot. He's one person at home, and he's a different person at school, especially when he's in a new environment. It's I always feel like it's 2 steps back and 1 step forward, and 2 steps back and 1 step forward. And it takes those, it takes creating those little opportunities to help him ease his way forward. And it's not, sometimes sometimes it's just painfully slow. Painfully slow, and accepting that, and understanding that is part of the journey, I think. But not giving up. I refuse to give up,
Right.
but just knowing that things are going to be slower. We'll get there, and the person speeding to the traffic light will eventually get to that traffic light too. So.
And channeling the coach and the cheerleader inside of us, like that we just need to be the font of coaching, positivity.
And the other thing that, and I saw this as a case manager, and we are the only ones, we're the one that is with them the entire time, from birth all the way through. We are the advocate, and we are the one person that is that constant. Each year you get a whole new set of teachers, you might change schools. So, us being that constant, and we've got to stay strong. We've got to take care of ourselves, and do what we need to do. But we are, we can't rely, I've got to say, communication is key with everybody, and everybody has to communicate with each other. But really, the bottom line is we're the ones that are the team leaders here, and we need to help our child know that too, that we're part of that team, and we're there to lift them up.
No, absolutely, and I think there's a lot of our own strength comes from the people who are supporting us. But it's a motto that I actually have on my door as I walk out every day. It's one day at a time. Right. And I think that's the best that we can all ask for, is just to try to be a better version of who we were the day before. Right. And
Amen.
And don't be hard on yourself if that day it wasn't your best, because you have tomorrow. I will leave it on that. And Jennifer, I really, really appreciate you kicking off this 3-part series and being with us and sharing your story and all these amazing tips. I know everyone who rewatch this recording and get the materials will so appreciate it. I very much appreciate it. As well as Debbie, thank you so much for starting this off, and it was just an amazing share. And Greenie, thank you so much as well. We'll make sure to we'll talk twice as fast next week, just to keep it interesting. But no,
and thank you to you, Ori. Great job, and to our other interpreters.
I appreciate everyone. And just so everyone, as Debbie mentioned, you'll get, and Jennifer mentioned, you'll get an email tomorrow with the materials that we discussed here today, as well as more information on our next week's session with this set part 2 of our 3-part series with cerebral palsy. But until then, I hope everyone stays safe and have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Thanks,
Thank
y'all.
you, Ori.
Have a good night.